Well, we have a problem. I've rewritten this sermon 4 times, which never happens. And this is the text I use for week-long study series for people wanting to understand spirituality in the workplace better. So making this short and sweet is a challenge. But I wanted to tell you where it all began for me, at least in a formal sense. 15 years ago, I was invited to be a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School, not where you get a whole lot of United Church ministers going on their study leave, but that's where I got to go. And I was given free range to meet with any of the faculty there. And they had all been given an introduction to me and my area of interest, so they were all prepared. And Harvard does this all the time. It's an amazing, amazing program. So I was sitting with their ethics professor, Sandra Sucher, and we were talking about a whole lot of things. And she stopped in the middle of a sentence. She said, "Now, see, that's exactly the kind of thing I wish my rabbi would talk about." And we carried on our conversation. But that was the germ that got me going in a particular direction. And it unfolded, and I have spent the next 15 years doing research, which is called Real World, Real Sermons. And I interview people from all walks of life, many who have never ever set foot in a church of any kind, and I ask them what the important issues of their lives are and what they wish somebody would talk about to help give them insight. And I have almost 200 topics on the list. And I used to go through that every Sunday. I'd read the scriptures for the Sunday, and then I'd go through my list of topics and see if the scriptures spoke to any of those topics. And that's how I would carry on. But without a doubt, the question that appeared most often, by a long margin, was, who am I? That is the question that is at the forefront of people's lives today. Who am I? Now, if you go on Ancestry.ca, they will tell you who you are. And if you go to 23andMe and send them a DNA sample, they will give you the lovely pie chart that tells you all about your ancestry. If you're from my family, you'll go to my basement where there are the 7 cases of my mother's genealogical research, and you can find your way back to the 1600s of the fake niece in Scotland. Nobody cares. But there is a yearning in people to know who they are. So let's go back to Moses, and I know everybody loves the burning bush part, but we're going to ignore that. We're going to get to the part where God says to Moses out of that bush, "Oh, by the way, you're going back to Egypt and you're going to bring my people here." And Moses' response is, "Who am I? Me of all people?" Now, from last week to this week, we skipped over chapter 2 of Exodus, and I'm going to give you the Cole's Note version of what's there. So you remember the call to kill all the male Hebrew babies. So Moses is in the little basket on the Nile. The Pharaoh's daughter finds him, takes him into her household, hires his mother to be the wet nurse. All is peachy keen. So he's a Hebrew growing up amongst Pharaoh's family. Well, he gets older. He's aware that he's a Hebrew. He sees an overseer beating a worker, a Hebrew worker, and in a fit of rage, he kills the overseer. Pharaoh puts a bounty on his head. He races out of town, and he ends up in Midian. And he's trying to keep a low profile. He gets a job as a shepherd, not a real great job. And he marries the boss's daughter, real smart. But you know, the Hebrews don't think he's Hebrew enough. The Egyptians don't think he's Egyptian enough. The Midians don't think he's Midianite enough. And then suddenly God is saying, "You're the one." And Moses is full of despair. Do you remember who played Moses in the 10 Commandments? Charlton Heston, strong, chiseled, dignified. Well, one of the worship scholars that I really like is a fellow from Calvin College in Holland, Michigan. It's a reform college in the U.S., and his name is Scott Hotze. And he said, actually, that Moses in this incident is less like Charlton Heston than he is like Woody Allen. We need to read him as he was in that moment. Kind of hapless, having no sense of himself, beaten down by life, confused, and sure as heck scared about what's coming out of this burning bush. So, what is it about Moses in that moment? That hapless moment, Moses who says, "Who am I?" What does that Moses have in common with all those people I've interviewed who've asked the same question? Who am I? And what does it say about us and our world? Now, it's an interesting tidbit. In 2012, Forum Research did a poll of religion in Canada. And you can go online and read the whole thing. It's quite interesting. But one of the curious things is, well, religious observance, so church-going, keeps declining in Canada. Identifying oneself as spiritual is going up, steadily. Up and up and up. Now, the definition of spiritual is very fuzzy. Everybody has their own little thing. But what they hold in common, by and large, is that they're searching. They're searching for more. They want something to hang on to. What makes me, me? Will I find it in meditation? Will I find it in yoga? Will I find it in triathlons? I can't imagine you find yourself doing triathlons, but everybody's got their thing. People want to know where they fit in. Young people are graduating from university with debt that I never imagined having when I went through school. And not the same prospect for jobs. I had the luxury of finishing my undergraduate degree, paid my own way. I drove a truck at a steel factory in Hamilton for the summers. I was the first girl. I was told if any of the men were rude or obnoxious, they would be fired. But it was a wonderful experience. And I was able to spend 5 months backpacking around Europe and still had money left over to start grad school. When my daughter finished her first year of undergraduate at Toronto, she got the same hourly wage that summer as I did in the summer of 1974. My tuition was $800 in my first year, hers was $8,800. Where do I fit in? How will I get established? Am I good enough to do what's expected of me? And what's really important in life? See, Moses' life was totally out of control. On top of a voice coming out of a burning bush, the voice was telling him to go back to Egypt, where Pharaoh still had a bounty on his head, where the Israelites were still slaves. This was an impossible task. And so Moses, grasping at straws, did something fascinating. And sometimes when we read scripture in worship, you don't kind of get all the really exciting parts. So there's Moses saying, "Who am I?" And then light comes on. He says, "Okay, bush, I want your name. Give me your name." Well, that reminded me of an episode a few years ago. I was flying from Winnipeg via Denver to Salt Lake City to go skiing in Utah. My husband was already down in Phoenix. We have different ideas of winter vacations. and I was waiting. This is when, for those of you who've been through Winnipeg, there was the old Winnipeg airport, and the International Departure Lounge was the size of a walk-in closet. And there were 2 flights that were set to depart, and they were both delayed. So 2 plane loads of people were crammed into this tiny space with no ventilation, and the nice lady with the little snack bar there promptly closed it at 6, and we were all still there with no water, no food. And my name was called, so I went up to the desk, and they said, well, as you can see, the flight from Chicago is delayed, and it's going to make for a tight connection in Denver. So the flight attendants will give you your gate, and they will hold everybody back so you can get to your plane. So that's fine. I get on the flight, and the flight attendant comes over, and she says, it's gate, 79. Have any of you flown through Denver? I think I ran all the way to the Utah border. And I got to the gate just as the plane is being pushed away from the jetway. So I walked back the 2 or 3 kilometers to my original gate, and there's the United Airlines customer service person. And there's a woman in front of me, so I'm standing there thinking I'm going to be stuck overnight in Denver. And this woman is there. She's saying, what do you mean? You're not putting me on another flight. I can't believe this. And then she whipped out her BlackBerry. You won't believe what's happening here. And this went on for about 15 minutes, her screaming at the customer service person and then relaying it to this person in the phone. And at the very end, as this came to its denouement, she said, I want your name. So I can't read this passage from Exodus 3 without reliving that. Happy news was I stepped forward figuring I was going to be sleeping sitting up, and she said, oh, that was all our problem. Here are some toiletries, and here's a bag, and here's the chit to get to the hotel. Here's your hotel room. Here's food chits. I went, I should miss planes all the time. This is great. I stayed in the Marriott in a suite. But in ancient times, to know somebody's name was to have power over them. And Moses' life was going in every direction at that moment. And what he wanted was to latch on to just a little bit of the power of God. And God gives him a name. Aya, Asher, Aya is what it is in Hebrew. And when we see it written, it's YHWH. I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. The word is too holy to be spoken, so you don't put any vowels in it. And this phrase has been researched and argued ad nauseum by biblical scholars, and it still remains basically unresolved. Except that it is a brilliant response to the question, who am I? God says, I am who I am. When you're feeling small and insignificant, or imperfect, or afraid, or out of control, where you want to understand where you come from or what grounds you in this immense universe, God says, I am. That's the answer Moses got. And it's remarkable, because in that short phrase, it says, you are mine. I love you. When your life is going in all those directions, I'll be there. I am even bigger than the limits of your imagination. And so with me, anything is possible. And I will help you make sense of it all. See, and when people are rushing to all the latest new spiritual fad, I keep wondering, when you're wondering who you are, why can't you just understand or appreciate, grasp this God who from generation to generation has stayed changeless, whose message has remained the same, who greets our sense of loneliness and lostness and vulnerability and says, I'm here. This same God who, when we're not sure where we belong, offers us refuge. And in fact, offers to recharge our batteries so that we're ready to get out into the world again. It's interesting, after all the fiascos in the business world back in the late, 1990s, with the Enron scandal and all of those, and then later on with the banking scandals that were portrayed so well in Blind Spot, if you saw that movie this year. But out of that, a group of students at Harvard Business School developed the MBA oath. Also, you can see it online. I have the whole book, which explains the whole process. And now MBA students take it. Because what happened out of all that fiasco, and I was there at Harvard for part of it, and listened to both the faculty and the students talk about, I'm here at what's supposed to be the best school in the world to get an MBA, but that doesn't seem to be enough to make people do the right thing. Sandra Sucher said, you can teach ethics. You can get a student who gets 100% on their ethics exam, but you can't make them ethical. And so Harvard encouraged their students to identify who they are. And it says that. It talks about that in their oath. What anchors them in this complex life? Who and what they're responsible for in the world? That it's okay to seek help and you don't have to have all the answers. Moses is a reminder of what we all struggle with, to know who we are, where our life is going, and what really matters. And as Moses found his way, so we trust. We all will too, with God's help. Amen.